During the final years of the Second World War, the skies above Europe were already crowded with thousands of aircraft fighting for control of the air. Allied bombers crossed the continent in enormous formations while German fighters struggled to intercept them before they reached their targets. For several years the technology of aircraft had changed slowly, but by 1944 a revolutionary machine appeared that looked completely different from anything that had flown before. This aircraft was faster, louder and far more advanced than the propeller-driven fighters that had dominated the war until that point. The aircraft was the Messerschmitt Me 262, the first operational jet fighter in history. When German engineers first began experimenting with jet engines in the late 1930s, the idea seemed almost futuristic. Traditional aircraft used propellers driven by piston engines, which had been the standard design for decades. Jet propulsion worked in a completely different way by pulling air into an engine, compressing it and then expelling it at extremely high speed to produce thrust. This design allowed aircraft to reach speeds far greater than anything powered by propellers. German scientists believed that this technology could give their air force a powerful advantage if it could be developed successfully. Early experiments showed promise but also revealed many technical challenges. Jet engines were extremely complex and the materials required to build them had to withstand enormous temperatures and stresses. Engineers spent years testing different designs while the war continued around them. Eventually the aircraft that would become the Me 262 began taking shape. The design looked sleek and modern with two jet engines mounted under the wings and a streamlined fuselage built for speed. When the aircraft first flew under jet power in 1942, the results were astonishing. Test pilots reported that the aircraft was dramatically faster than any fighter they had flown before. At full speed the Me 262 could exceed 800 km per hour, which made it nearly impossible for many Allied fighters to catch once it was already in flight. German commanders quickly realized that such an aircraft could potentially change the air war over Europe. Allied bombers had been devastating German industry through constant bombing raids, and the Luftwaffe needed a way to stop them more effectively. The Me 262 appeared to offer exactly that solution. Armed with powerful 30mm cannons, the jet fighter could destroy heavy bombers with only a few hits. Its speed allowed it to approach bomber formations quickly and escape before escort fighters could intercept it. On paper, the aircraft seemed like the perfect weapon to defend Germany's skies. However, the path from experimental prototype to operational weapon was far more complicated than expected. The jet engines used by the Me 262 required advanced materials that were difficult to produce in large quantities during wartime. Germany was already facing shortages of certain metals and resources, which made manufacturing the engines even more challenging. The engines also had relatively short lifespans compared to piston engines and required careful maintenance. These technical difficulties slowed production and prevented the aircraft from being introduced as quickly as German commanders had hoped. Another major problem came from within the German leadership itself. Adolf Hitler became personally involved in decisions about the new aircraft, and he believed the jet should be used as a fast bomber rather than purely as a fighter. Hitler imagined the aircraft carrying bombs to attack Allied ground forces and cities at high speed. Many Luftwaffe commanders disagreed with this idea because they believed the aircraft's greatest strength was its ability to intercept bombers. The disagreement caused delays in the development and deployment of the jet fighter. Engineers were forced to modify the aircraft so it could carry bombs, which complicated the design and slowed production even further. By the time the first operational units began receiving the Me-262, the war had already turned against Germany. Allied forces were advancing on multiple fronts and bombing raids were damaging factories across the country. Despite these challenges, the aircraft finally entered combat in 1944. Allied pilots were shocked when they first encountered the new jet fighter. Many described seeing a German aircraft suddenly appear at incredible speed before attacking and disappearing just as quickly. Traditional propeller fighters struggled to catch the jet because it was simply too fast in level flight. The Me-262 quickly proved that jet technology had the potential to revolutionize air combat. German pilots flying the aircraft often targeted large bomber formations that crossed German territory almost daily. Approaching at high speed, they fired their heavy cannons into the bombers before turning away. A few well-placed shots could destroy even the heavily armored American B-17 Flying Fortress or B-24 bomber. Some versions of the jet were also equipped with air-to-air rockets which allowed them to attack bomber formations from greater distances. These weapons increased the aircraft's effectiveness and made it one of the most dangerous interceptors of the war. Yet despite its impressive capabilities, the Me-262 faced serious limitations that prevented it from fully changing the course of the war. One of the biggest problems was the vulnerability of the aircraft during takeoff and landing. Jet engines provided enormous speed in flight, but they accelerated slowly when starting from the ground. Allied pilots quickly learned that attacking German jet bases during these moments was one of the most effective ways to destroy the aircraft. Fighter patrols often waited near known airfields and attacked jets while they were landing or taking off when they were least able to defend themselves. Allied bombing campaigns also targeted factories producing the jet fighters and their engines, which further reduced production numbers. In addition, Germany simply did not have enough trained pilots and fuel to operate large numbers of these advanced aircraft. Many experienced Luftwaffe pilots had already been lost during earlier years of the war, and fuel shortages were becoming severe by 1944 and 1945. As a result, many Me-262 aircraft spent long periods grounded because there was not enough fuel available for training or combat missions. Even with these problems, the aircraft demonstrated what the future of aviation would look like. Its speed and firepower showed that jet fighters could easily outperform traditional piston aircraft once the technology matured. Allied intelligence officers carefully studied captured Me-262 aircraft and recognized how significant the new technology was. The aircraft represented a glimpse into the next generation of military aviation that would dominate the skies after the war ended. As the Me-262 slowly began appearing in greater numbers during the final years of the war, Allied pilots quickly realized they were facing a completely new type of enemy aircraft. For years, the air battles over Europe had followed familiar patterns where propeller-driven fighters chased each other through the sky in turning dogfights. The arrival of the jet fighter suddenly changed these rules. The Me-262 was so fast that traditional dogfighting tactics often became useless. Allied pilots frequently reported seeing the German jet flash past their formations at incredible speed before they could even react. Many described the aircraft as appearing suddenly out of nowhere, firing its weapons and disappearing just as quickly. Because the jet was capable of speeds far greater than most Allied fighters, it could often choose when to attack and when to withdraw from combat. This gave German pilots flying the aircraft a major tactical advantage. One of the primary missions of the Me-262 was to intercept the massive bomber formations that crossed German airspace almost daily. American and British bombers were targeting factories, railways and oil refineries in an effort to destroy Germany's industrial capacity. These bombers often flew in tight defensive formations protected by escort fighters such as the P-51 Mustang and the P-47 Thunderbolt. Earlier German fighters like the Bf-109 and Fw-190 had struggled to break through these defensive formations, especially once the long-range escort fighters began protecting the bombers throughout the entire mission. The Me-262 offered a potential solution to this problem. Its speed allowed it to approach the bombers quickly from a distance, and its heavy armament made it extremely dangerous. The aircraft carried 4 powerful 30mm cannons in its nose which could destroy a heavy bomber with only a few hits. Some versions were also equipped with air-to-air rockets that could be fired into bomber formations from farther away. These rockets did not need to hit a bomber directly to cause damage because the explosion could destroy aircraft flying close together. German pilots flying the jet often attacked in fast passes rather than prolonged engagements. They approached the bomber formation at high speed, fired their weapons, and then climbed away before the escort fighters could intercept them. This tactic made the aircraft particularly effective when everything worked correctly. Several bomber crews reported seeing their aircraft destroyed almost instantly by the powerful cannon fire of the jet fighters. Despite these successes, the Me-262 still faced serious challenges. The aircraft required long runways and careful handling during takeoff and landing, which made its airfields vulnerable targets. Allied reconnaissance aircraft quickly identified the bases where the jets were operating. Fighter units were then assigned to patrol these areas, searching for jets as they took off or returned from missions. Attacking a jet during these moments was one of the few times when Allied pilots could match its speed and maneuverability. Many Me-262 aircraft were destroyed in this way before they even had the chance to engage enemy bombers. Another problem was the reliability of the early jet engines. The engines were powerful but fragile and often wore out quickly after only a limited number of flight hours. German engineers did not have enough time or resources to perfect the design before the war situation became desperate. Mechanics had to constantly inspect and replace engine components, which slowed the operational tempo of the jet units. Fuel shortages also became a serious issue by 1944 and 1945 as Allied bombing campaigns targeted Germany's oil production and synthetic fuel plants. Without sufficient fuel, even the most advanced aircraft could not operate effectively. Many Me-262 squadrons found themselves with aircraft ready for combat but not enough fuel to train new pilots or conduct regular missions. This situation limited the number of experienced pilots who could operate the aircraft effectively. Even so, the jet fighter still achieved notable successes when it did manage to engage Allied aircraft. Some German pilots became famous for their skill in flying the Me-262 and were able to shoot down multiple bombers during their missions. These encounters demonstrated just how dangerous the aircraft could have been if it had been introduced earlier in the war or produced in greater numbers. Allied commanders recognized the threat posed by the jet fighter and began developing tactics to counter it. Escort fighters were instructed to remain close to bomber formations and watch carefully for approaching jets. Pilots were also warned to monitor German airfields where jets were known to operate. By attacking these bases repeatedly, the Allies hoped to destroy the aircraft before they could take off. Bombing raids targeted factories producing the jet engines and components, which further slowed production. As the war continued, the number of operational Me-262 aircraft increased, but not nearly enough to change the overall balance of power in the air. Allied air forces possessed thousands of fighters and bombers while Germany struggled to produce enough fuel, pilots and aircraft to defend its territory effectively. Even the revolutionary jet fighter could not overcome these overwhelming disadvantages. Still, the aircraft left a powerful impression on everyone who encountered it. Allied pilots respected the speed and firepower of the jet while German pilots admired the technological leap it represented. The Me 262 had proven that jet propulsion could dominate the skies once the technology was refined and widely produced. It was a glimpse into the future of aviation that would soon replace the propeller-driven fighters of the Second World War. For many historians, the aircraft represents one of the most fascinating examples of advanced technology appearing too late to change the outcome of a conflict. Had the Me 262 entered service earlier in the war with reliable engines and sufficient fuel supplies, it might have posed a much greater challenge to the Allied bombing campaign. Instead, it became a remarkable but ultimately limited weapon introduced during the final stages of a war that Germany was already losing. By the final months of the war, the situation for Germany had become increasingly desperate, and even the revolutionary jet fighter could not reverse the tide. Allied armies were advancing from both the west and the east while massive bombing raids continued striking German cities and industrial centers. Despite these conditions, the Me 262 continued flying missions in an effort to defend the remaining territory of the collapsing German state. German pilots who were fortunate enough to fly the jet knew that they were operating one of the most advanced aircraft ever built during the war. Many described the feeling of accelerating down the runway and reaching speeds far greater than those of traditional propeller fighters. Once in the air, the aircraft could climb quickly and approach bomber formations before escort fighters had time to react. Several units equipped with the Me 262 achieved success intercepting Allied bombers during the final months of the conflict. The jet's powerful cannons could destroy heavy bombers with only a few bursts of fire, and some pilots managed to shoot down multiple aircraft during single missions. Yet these successes could not overcome the overwhelming numerical superiority of Allied air forces. Thousands of Allied aircraft were operating across Europe while only a small number of Me 262 jets were available for combat at any given time. The production of the aircraft had been slowed by bombing raids on factories and by shortages of critical materials needed to build the jet engines. Many completed aircraft also sat unused because there was not enough fuel to operate them regularly. The destruction of Germany's oil supply by Allied bombing campaigns had created a severe fuel crisis that affected every branch of the German military, including the Luftwaffe. Without fuel, even the most advanced aircraft remained grounded. Allied intelligence quickly recognized that destroying the jet bases and factories was essential to preventing the new technology from becoming a serious threat. Bombing missions targeted airfields where Me 262 squadrons were stationed, and fighter patrols searched the skies near these bases looking for jets during takeoff and landing. Because jet engines required more time to accelerate than piston engines, these moments were extremely dangerous for German pilots. Many jets were destroyed while attempting to land or take off before they had the chance to use their speed advantage in combat. By early 1945, the war in Europe was clearly approaching its end. Soviet forces were advancing toward Berlin from the east while American and British armies pushed deeper into Germany from the west. German air defenses were weakening rapidly as experienced pilots were lost and aircraft production continued to decline. Even the revolutionary jet fighter could not compensate for these enormous strategic disadvantages. Some of the final combat missions flown by Me-262 units occurred during the defense of German territory as Allied forces closed in on the remaining Luftwaffe bases. German pilots continued attempting to intercept bomber formations and attack Allied aircraft whenever possible, but their numbers were far too small to change the course of the war. In some cases the jets were used to attack Allied fighter aircraft directly, although this was often more dangerous than engaging bombers because the jet lost some of its speed advantage during maneuvering combat. As the war came to an end, many Me-262 aircraft were destroyed by their own crews to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. Others were captured intact by Allied forces who were eager to study the revolutionary technology used in the aircraft. Engineers and pilots from the United States, Britain and the Soviet Union examined the jet carefully and realized that it represented the future of aviation. The lessons learned from the Me-262 would influence the design of many post-war jet fighters developed by different nations. After the war, several captured aircraft were tested by Allied pilots who were impressed by the speed and firepower of the design despite its early technical problems. The aircraft demonstrated clearly that jet propulsion would soon replace piston engines in military aviation. Within a few years after the war ended, many countries began producing their own jet fighters, inspired in part by the technology pioneered by the Me-262. In this way, the aircraft achieved a lasting legacy even though it arrived too late to save Germany during the Second World War. Today, historians often describe the Me-262 as one of the most advanced weapons of the war and one of the first true jet fighters to enter combat. Its speed, firepower and revolutionary design marked a turning point in aviation history. Yet the aircraft also serves as an example of how even groundbreaking technology cannot overcome strategic realities such as shortages of resources, trained pilots and time. The jet fighter appeared when Germany was already losing the war and could not be produced in the numbers necessary to challenge the enormous Allied air forces dominating the skies over Europe. In the end, the Messerschmitt Me-262 remained a remarkable glimpse into the future of air combat, a secret weapon that demonstrated incredible potential but arrived far too late to change the outcome of the war.